What has transpired between the Indian and Chinese troops at the line of actual control in Ladakh is unprecedented in many ways if you look at such clashes that have been going on over the last 4-5 decades between the two countries. But while the Indian side has been forthcoming in its information, especially with regard to the casualties, the Chinese side is refusing to divulge any information of that nature. Now, what's going on? I'm going to turn to Tushar Gupta on the question of casualties on the Chinese side.
Hey Karan. Karan, so it's evident by now that we lost 20 soldiers in the clashes that happened on June 15. And just yesterday, we also had 10 soldiers who were captured by the PLA. They were returned to the Indian side. But what has not been clear in this entire scenario is the number of casualties, both the number of soldiers killed and the number of soldiers injured on the Chinese side. There have been conflicting reports. There were some reports where it said that the Indian troops were outnumbered in the ratio 1:5. So for every one troop, there were actually 5 Chinese troops. But there has been no clarity on the casualties on the Chinese side, which is very baffling. The Indian media, the ANI on Twitter, it quoted some intelligence sources and it said 35 casualties on Chinese side, which includes both dead and injured. Some reports put the number at 43. Some even go ahead and put the number at 60, 70. So there's been a lot of conflict. Now, of course, you would understand the Indian side to look for alternate sources, given it's so hard for the information to come out of China. But even in China, there has been no admission of the number, which has the number of troops that has been lost in this entire conflict. Some of the media houses, the journalists there, they have said that there is, of course, a confirmation that lives have been lost on the Chinese side, but no one is really putting a number forward. That's how it is.
Right, Tushar. Now, the media on the Indian and Chinese side have a very different treatment to the conflict. The Chinese side is almost downplaying the incident. We saw on Twitter the front pages of several Chinese papers, for instance, that had no news of the conflict at all. So why is China doing that?
See, there are a lot of differences between the media on the both sides. Let's start with the Indian media first. It operates in a democratic nation. So, of course, the freedom is far more than that will be ever witnessed on the Chinese side. So, the Indian media has been asking all the questions. They were, in fact, the first to report on Tuesday morning that something of this had occurred, and they quoted the numbers. It started with 3, then they later confirmed it to 20. So the media has been covering this issue very elaborately on the Indian side. Now, the problem with Chinese media, what people really need to understand, that most of the media is actually backed by the state. It runs on state backing. So it's not very easy for them to come out clean when it comes to the numbers or even the entire conflict. Of course, some of the newspapers there have put a very small part of the news on the 16th or the 17th page, given that in the same week, Beijing is also dealing with the second wave of the coronavirus outbreak. So in China, the focus has entirely been the outbreak in Beijing. They haven't really covered this issue. Now, there could be multiple reasons for that, Karan. One thing for sure is the interference of the state, the Chinese Communist Party in the media. That is preventing from any coverage of this to happen. The people there do not know. Of course, the Chinese version of Twitter, that is Weibo, there were a lot of tweets, I think 110 million tweets until Wednesday earlier this week about the entire conflict. But again, the media coverage has been very less. And because of that, the numbers on Chinese side are unclear. The people of China do not really understand what has happened, are instead being fed a Chinese version of the entire event in which the Chinese come out as clean.
Right, Tushar, I think both of us can agree that China is clearly downplaying the incident. And the fact of the matter is that it's just par for the course for them to do that. In fact, even the 1962 numbers on the Chinese side were revealed only in the 90s. So it seems like there is a precedent to that. But is there any other reason that you can think of why China would be downplaying the incident?
Oh, plenty of reasons actually. So one word we've been seeing being used a lot by the Chinese side from this week is goodwill. Global Times actually ran a report saying that the Chinese army or the Chinese government may not be coming forward with the numbers because they want to maintain a certain goodwill. I don't understand what the goodwill is. There has been a conflict. It's been accepted internationally. So what kind of a goodwill are you trying to maintain? The second point they made was that if we compare the numbers, say we confirm that India lost 20 soldiers and China lost 35 soldiers, we would be stoking feelings of nationalism. But that's already there. Even if you do not report the numbers of the incident, any conflict will evoke a certain nationalistic sentiment. So I don't understand how China wants to use this as a defense. The third thing is the national mood in China, Karan. Sorry. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, the mood in China has been very somber in the sense a lot of lives have been lost. And again, there's no clarity on the COVID-19 deaths also. So China is battling with this kind of a situation on two fronts. One, the kind of deaths that were reported during COVID-19, and two, what has happened now. I'll give you an example. Let's take a reference from what happened after COVID-19. China, from January to March, that's 2020, changed the definition of COVID-19 deaths 7 times. 7 times there was a change into how the deaths were being classified under the coronavirus outbreak. This was a very smart effort to downplay the number of deaths so as to make sure that the people in China do not really feel a serious outbreak of the virus. Though the videos that came out of Wuhan, they tell a different story. In April, 8th revision came, and there were a lot of peer studies too, which said that the Chinese have been underestimating the number of dead people due to coronavirus by a factor of 20. Of course, none of these studies ever saw the light of the day. They were not peer reviewed. They were not acknowledged by the Western media. But there has been this entire thing has been played out before. That's one thing. Another factor is the pressure on Xi Jinping. Okay, Xi Jinping is not having a great last 1.5 years. It started with the Hong Kong protests. He's having problems in the South China Sea. He's having problems with Taiwan. North Korea is on fire, and US, the relations have broken down since the coronavirus outbreak. While they were looking to fix things when the year started with the trade deal and things like that, the relationship has broken down. So there's immense pressure on Xi Jinping as well. In this scenario, if the media in China came out clean with the number of dead people, there would be tremendous pressure on Xi Jinping to act, not just from the people, but from within the party. And it's a complex party system, even though Xi Jinping is the chairman of basically everything. But that would actually warrant a far more strict reaction from him, which he might be not in a position to give. Lastly, Karan, at the risk of sounding jingoistic, the Chinese have been stressing a lot about diplomacy, about toning the things down, about easing the tensions on the front. At the risk of sounding jingoistic again, a country which has actually had the offensive in a conflict like this will never push for easing of tensions necessarily. If they have lost, let's say, 2 soldiers for our 20, they won't care if the tensions are eased because they would feel they are ready for it. And they've moved a lot of forces. They've moved hundreds and hundreds of soldiers, artillery into the Galwan area. So did they actually experience more number of dead soldiers in the Monday conflict? That's my question. Again, we'll never come to know, as you rightly pointed out, the deaths in the 1962 war. They were reported late, early 90s. That's almost 30 years. So we'll never really know the number of people who died. Because China, if a nation like that can keep a lid on the deaths due to COVID-19, these are just a few dozen soldiers whose life probably doesn't even matter in the greater scheme of things that Xi Jinping wants to do. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is.
Right, Tushar, finally, let's just extend that COVID-19 point a little further, because that's the most recent example of the complete lack of transparency from the Chinese side. I mean, their case figures stand at just over 83,000. Given that coronavirus basically came from there and the kind of pictures and videos that we were getting from China, the numbers, there's an awful lack of clarity about it. Could you comment on that?
Well, of course, there's an awful lack of clarity. I have some notes here with me. So, in fact, there were some researchers which put the cases at more than 275,000 in early February, Karan. Wuhan went into a lockdown in early February someplace, but they were already putting a number close to 3 lakh. China never admitted to that number. There is a problem of information that is coming out of China because the entire media that is backed by the Chinese. So, of course, you will never have any information. And again, the Beijing outbreak, the second wave, the Chinese are very quick to attribute it to the Europeans. They were very quick to say that the virus came back to the country because of some of the meat they had imported from Europe. So again, they are downplaying the entire risk. Europe, Australia, the continent of Europe, the countries of the European Union, Australia, they all wanted an investigation into the outbreak. China rejected that because again, the information which comes from China is very, very, it's a very state version of it. If China were a black hole, it would be the black hole of information because never anything ever comes out of there. That's how it is.
Great, Tushar. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks, Karan.